what the government is doing is they're making Australia less equal, which will cause our economy to grow slower. They are handing it mostly to high income earners who tend to buy more in points and save, so it doesn't help stimulate the economy as much. And it's truly enormous. Like, what you won't hear from them is the $15 billion in stage 3 tax cuts that they still think are a great idea.
One for mum, one for dad, one for the country.
And there has never been a more exciting time to be an Australian.
Budgets are about choices, Fran, and you show what you value through the choices you make.
Dead, buried, cremated.
This is coal. Don't be afraid. Don't be scared. The Treasurer.
Australia's basically done for. We'll just end up being a third-rate economy. You know, a banana republic.
How good is Australia?
Just follow the money.
G'day, and welcome to Follow the Money, the Australia Institute's podcast demystifying the big economic issues in Australia and putting them in plain English. I'm Ebony Bennett, Deputy Director at the Australia Institute, and as of today, it's 34 sleeps to the budget, which will be on Tuesday, March 29 this year. Normally it's in May, but with the election due, the budget has been brought forward. And as we head to the budget and then the election, the Australia Institute intends to talk about tax reform.
With just a few months until the next federal election, the Coalition has returned to its old box of tricks.
Tax cuts.
The Treasurer has drawn election battle lines with Labor over his $130 billion Phase 3 tax cuts.
Putting more money into people's pockets, rewarding aspiration, encouraging. That's more money into people's pockets, that's encouraging effort, and that's rewarding aspiration.
Billions of dollars in tax relief for wealthy Australians is locked in regardless of who wins the next election.
The one way you build your economy back is you don't hit it with higher taxes.
Today, the Australian newspaper is reporting that Labor will not move to repeal the $130 billion Stage 3 tax cuts.
And many people have just been left behind, people on the lowest income. So tax cuts don't help the bottom 30% of households.
We think tax is good. We think tax is the price we pay for a civilised society. And part of that debate is whether the taxes that we apply, or the tax cuts we give, or the tax concessions we give out are efficient and equitable. And we think that a debate about tax reform should be bigger than just increasing the GST or cutting company and income taxes. But because it is an election year, income tax cuts are likely to feature in this year's budget as a sweetener for the electorate. And so income tax cuts is where we are going to start this debate. It's where we're going to begin. And there's a temporary tax cut for low and middle income earners called the Limito that's due to come to an end in this year's budget, or this year, while permanent income tax cuts for high income earners are due to start very soon. Collectively, it's a huge income tax cuts package. So to discuss who in the Australian community really benefits from these income tax cuts, I'm joined by our senior economist, Matt Grudnoff. G'day, Matt.
Hi, Eb.
Matt, we know the Coalition hates debt and deficit. Are you expecting big spending cuts in this year's budget?
Right before an election. No. For some reason, budget repair takes a holiday once every 3 years, and this is the year that it takes a holiday on. Right before an election, politicians are keen to hand stuff out, whether it's tax cuts, whether it's spending, and I don't expect that this budget will be the big budget to try and reduce the deficit. That will likely come next year. The worst budget is usually the one after the election, when we're the furthest from another election.
We're going to talk about a couple of different income tax cuts, and we're going to start with the Limito, or the low and middle income tax offset. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right.
That's right. So first of all, can you tell me what it is? When did it come in?
Yeah, so the Limito, the low and middle income tax offset, came in 2018. It was part of stage 1 of the government's 3-stage plan. They've implemented stage 1, they've implemented stage 2, and stage 3 has been passed by legislation, and we'll talk a bit more about that later, and it comes in 2024. And the Limito was basically a tax cut, or a tax offset actually, that focused, most of the tax cut goes to low and middle income earners, hence the name.
Yeah, so people who are earning lower incomes, the kind of people who would really benefit from a tax cut.
Yeah, so the maximum rate of the Limito is $1,080 a year, so just over $1,000, and everybody earning between $48,000 and $90,000 a year which is about almost half of all taxpayers earn between that, they all get the maximum benefit.
So it's really quite well targeted.
Yeah, exactly right. It's very targeted to those middle income earners.
And how long has it been around, and why do we think it's due to end this year?
Yeah, so it came in 2018 and then it was extended last year, but the extension was only for 1 year. So this coming year, when you put your tax return in, it'll be the last year that you might get the Lamito.
You're preparing the pre-election budget. Will you be extending the low income tax offset for another year, which is worth up to $1,080 for anyone on less than $126,000 a year?
Well, it won't surprise you or your listeners that I'm not going to preempt what's in or not in the budget in just a few weeks' time.
A lot of people rely on this, though.
And how is the Lamito different from other income tax cuts?
Yeah, so regular tax cuts usually changes in the rates or the thresholds of the income tax scales. They usually happen once a week or once a fortnight, however often you pay. You get a bit more money in your pay packet if you get a tax cut. The tax offset is different. It actually happens when you return, you get it all at once, and you get it when you put your tax return in. So you submit your tax return, the government works out how much either you owe or more likely you have a refund, and then they add the Lamito on top of that. So you effectively get a bigger refund. And the reason they do that, or the advantage of doing it that way, is that they're able to work out exactly how much you earn, so they're able to tailor that tax cut. So if you were to change the rates or the thresholds, even the low income rates or thresholds, then everybody gets that tax cut, even high income earners. So somebody on $200,000 a year would get the full amount of increasing, say, the tax-free threshold. Whereas the tax offset, you can target it and restrict it. So for example, the Lamito, nobody earning over $126,000 gets any of the Lamito.
So it's more or less means tested.
It's means tested, that's right. It's tax reform that's means tested, whereas normally high income earners get all of it.
Okay, and so if we're looking at the Lamito in particular, before we move on to the huge Stage 3 income tax cuts package overall, who benefits from the Lamito?
Well, as far as income earners, it's mostly people who are earning sort of around between $40,000 and about $90,000 a year. But also, as far as by gender goes, it's almost split 50-50. So I think it works out at 47% go to women and 53% go to men.
So pretty evenly split.
Reasonably evenly split. And if we then also look at by federal electorate, we can basically rank the federal electorates to see what proportion of each electorate has taxpayers in it that get that maximum $1,000 rate. And we find that of the top 10 electorates, 8 of them are Labor electorates and 2 of them are Liberal electorates. And if we look at all of them, we see that Labor electorates are far more likely to have people getting that maximum rate. And because these electorates tend to be sort of the outer suburban around our capital cities.
Okay. And why might the government want to either cut it or extend it if it's only temporary?
Yeah, look, I mean, 90% of taxpayers get the Lamito, and the government's actually planning to go to this election at the moment, unless they extend it, increasing people's taxes. So, the coalition likes to tell people that it's the party of lower taxes.
Under the coalition, taxes will always be lower.
But it's actually got a plan to increase taxes on 90% of taxpayers. And I think that the main reason it wants to get rid of this is because it's so well targeted. It mainly goes to middle income earners. High income earners get nothing of that. So in fact, the top 10% of taxpayers get exactly 0% of the Lamito. And the top 20% only get 5% of the Lamito. And also it mostly goes to Labor Party electorates. It doesn't flow through to those wealthy Liberal Party electorates.
These expanded tax cuts are part of a major structural reform to our tax system that will see around 95% of taxpayers face a marginal tax rate of no more than 30 cents on the dollar in 24-25.
Looking now at the Stage 3 income tax cuts, which were legislated a little while back alongside the Lamito. It kind of all came in as part of an overall tax cuts package. But my understanding is the Stage 3 income tax cuts are not only much, much huger because the package is permanent, but much less targeted at people who would kind of need them the most. Is that a good...
Yeah, look, the stage 3 tax cuts are big compared to the Lamito. The Lamito is worth about $7 billion a year. The stage 3 tax cuts are between $15 and $16 billion when they come in each year.
Sorry, can you just repeat that? How much is the Lamito?
So the Lamito is worth $7 billion a year. That's roughly what it costs the budget, rounded to the nearest billion. Rounded to the nearest billion, when it first comes in 2024, the stage 3 tax cuts will be worth $15 billion, so more than twice as much.
Wow.
Will you rule out tax cuts, though, beyond the next election if you win?
Well, we've already legislated significant tax cuts. There's stage 3 that come in from 24-25, and that's a real reform.
You've just told us about how well targeted the Lamito is. The stage 3 income tax cuts, who benefits from that?
Very different group of people. More than half of the stage 3 tax cuts goes to the top 10% of taxpayers. So, for example, to get the maximum rate of the stage 3 tax cuts, you have to earn $200,000 a year or more to get that maximum rate. Compared to the Lamito earning between $48,000 and $90,000 gets you the maximum rate. And the maximum rate of the Lamito is just over $1,000. The maximum rate of the stage 3 tax cuts is just over $9,000 a year.
$9,000 a year for people earning over $200,000.
That's correct, yep. So the vast majority goes to the top 10%. The bottom 20% of taxpayers gets none of the stage 3 tax cut.
So it's basically the total opposite of the Lamito. Lamito is tagged at low and middle income earners, and if you're earning a lot of money, you don't get it. And this is just totally tailored to the other end of town.
That's exactly right. Yep, the stage 3 tax cuts is really designed for high income earners. It also flattens the tax rates and makes our income tax system less progressive.
So what do you mean by that if you're not an economist? Why is it important for our income tax thresholds to be progressive?
Well, you might hear that, over time the rich get richer and the poor get poorer. Well, that doesn't have to happen that way. And one of the biggest things that stops that happening faster in Australia is our progressive income tax rates. That is, the more you earn, the larger as a proportion you pay in tax. So as high income earners earn more and more and more, they pay a bigger and bigger proportion of their income in tax. And that's what we call a progressive tax system. That is, high income earners pay a bigger proportion, low income earners pay a smaller proportion.
So that essentially means that the burden for taxes doesn't fall too much on the people who can least afford it. Is that the idea?
That's exactly right. And also, taxes enable the economy to have a larger proportion of government services, and those government services are generally used by lower income people more. So it's basically redistribution, if you like. Higher income, wealthy people pay more tax, lower income people get better government services, and that therefore reduces inequality within the economy. But these tax cuts will actually mean that somebody earning between $48,000 a year and $200,000 a year will have the same marginal tax rate. So
the same proportion of their income is getting paid in income taxes,
so if
whether you're a teacher?
So it's each additional dollar. So if somebody on $48,000 a year earned another $100, they would pay the same amount of tax as somebody earning $199,000 a year if they earned an extra $100. So when you think about it, you're talking about, CEO at $200,000 a year is basically paying the same marginal tax rate as somebody who's not much more than the minimum wage on $48,000 a year.
The top 1% of taxpayers get almost twice as much money as the entire bottom 60% combined. So this is ultimately a big handout to the rich and to men over women. It's going to grow the gender pay gap and it's going to grow inequality.
And so the idea is, generally speaking, that we'd be hoping, at least most people would be hoping, that Australia kind of, as we grow, that we all grow together and we're all sharing in the benefits of our growing economy. But this type of thing It's not progressive, it's regressive.
Yeah, now you're just being all lovey-dovey there. I'm
Sorry.
a heartless economist
Sorry.
here. But even as a heartless economist, right, I can tell you that there are advantages to more even societies. So setting aside all the good things that lower inequality does, it makes our society more cohesive. It's better for us.
Yeah, but stuff all that.
But
give
all
me
that,
the
heartless
economics
economists,
of it.
yeah. The World Bank has done some really interesting study, then replicated by heaps of other economists, that show that countries that are more equal grow faster than countries that are less equal. So if you reduce inequality within your society, your economy actually grows faster and everybody gets better off. Whereas less equal societies grow slower and their incomes grow slower than more equal societies.
I feel like that's not what I'm hearing in the national tax debate.
No, not at all. We need to, lower the tax for the wealthy so that they can become even richer and hopefully it'll all trickle down to the poor people. Well, we know trickle-down economics is nonsense, and we also know that the opposite is true. More equal societies that tax their rich more heavily, grow faster than societies that don't.
So it actually is a rising tide that lifts all boats when you're more equal.
That's right, yes.
The other thing I wanted to point out is that these are permanent income tax cuts. They'll go forever once they're in compared to the temporary
That's right. So
cuts.
Temporary tax cuts, permanent tax cuts, that's entirely up to the Parliament. But the way they're legislated at the moment, the Lamito will end at the end of this year, this financial year, whereas these stage 3 tax cuts, when they come in 2024, they are permanent changes to the tax system.
Under this government, tax relief for low and middle income earners is temporary, but tax relief for the highest income earners is permanent forever. But I think Australian people need to understand, as the government crows about these tax cuts, all they've done is guarantee a tax hike after the election, and that's just another example of why.
Now, the Lamito doesn't have to be temporary. The government could extend
legislate them.
Yep, they could legislate them for another year, another 5 years, another 10 years. They could legislate them and make them permanent. If you wanted to introduce lower taxes, then this is a better way of doing it because it goes to those who need them more.
But I hear it more often said, particularly by the coalition, whose tax cuts idea, the stage 3 tax cuts were, that there's something egalitarian about the fact that between earning, $40-ish thousand up to $200,000, you're all on the same level, and somehow that's equal.
Yeah, well, look, it is in a sense in that you pay the same, but
technically,
but the question is, a worker on $48,000, should they pay the same marginal rate as someone earning almost $200,000 a year? And for forever, since we've had income tax in Australia, going right back to the beginning of Australia, we've said, actually, no, we don't want that. We think that higher income earners should pay more tax. We think that we should have a
all the way
progressive...
back to even like the Menzies government, for example.
The Menzies era had far more progressive taxation than we do now. They had 16 or 17 tax brackets, whereas at the moment we have about 4 or 5. And so, we've always had a progressive tax system, and Australia has grown on that, and we've always thought that was a good idea. This is a radical departure from that. In fact, these stage 3 tax cuts are about getting rid of an entire tax bracket.
But what is this going to do to Commonwealth revenue in the long term? I know we don't only rely on taxes, but they are a big proportion of revenue.
Yeah, look, I mean, as I said, when these tax cuts come in, they're going to take about just over $15 billion a year. And if we look over the next 10 years, remembering for the next couple of years, they're not going to take anything because they haven't come in, they're worth about $184 billion over 10 years.
That's just such a huge amount of money. And I know we've just had a pandemic where the government did drop a lazy $200 billion on the economy, which, to be clear, we thought was the right thing to do. Probably it could have been targeted a little bit better, but, the economy, it has been shown, has done pretty well throughout that period because of it. So it's not necessarily a bad thing, but it's a huge amount of money that's really, you're telling me, in the most part, going to people over $200,000. Is that really?
And look, the main problem here is that let's say that the next election, the coalition, the current government wins, right? What they will then start saying is we need to reduce the deficit and run a surplus. And included in that after 2024 will be these enormous tax cuts costing the budget $15 billion and growing. every year. And so what they're doing effectively is they're handing out an enormous amount of money to high income earners, and then they're going to cut services to low income earners in order to try and run this budget surplus, which they think is so precious and so important.
Or at least to cut the deficit. And so this effectively is every year a permanent income tax cut that's not making Australia any more equal, and then it's money, I guess, that effectively we don't have for anything else.
No, exactly right. So, this is bad economics at every level.
We can't even pay down the deficit with it. It's gone for that.
It's gone for everything, yeah. And so, effectively, what the government is doing is they're making Australia less equal, which will cause our economy to grow slower. They are handing it mostly to high-income earners who tend to buy more in points and save, so it leaves the economy. It doesn't help stimulate the economy as much. And it's truly enormous. Like, you will hear... If the government decides that it really doesn't want to extend the Lamito in the coming budget, you will hear lots of talk about how expensive the Lamito is because it costs $7 billion a year. What you won't hear from them is the $15 billion in stage 3 tax cuts that they still think are a great idea.
So just to finish up, give me a bit of a summary. We're on budget night. The government scrapped the Lamito. Where does that leave taxpayers?
Yeah, look, so what we can actually do is we can think about it, well, they're actually going to increase taxes by getting rid of the Lamito, and they're going to decrease taxes a few years later with the stage 3 tax cuts. We can actually look at who benefits after both of those changes happen. Mm-hmm. And what we actually see is about 3/4 of taxpayers, everybody earning up to $90,000 a year, will be worse off under this. That is, they will lose more in the Lamito than they gain in the stage 3 tax cuts. Whereas the top 25% will be better off. And, for a period, they're not much better off, just over $90,000. But once you get up into $150,000, $200,000 a year, then people earning $200,000 a year don't get any of the Lamito, and they'll get an over $9,000 a year tax cut.
An extra $9,000.
A lot better off.
Yeah, that is a hell of a lot, isn't it?
$9,000 a year. Well, I suppose, if you're on, a salary like the people, the big 4 banks, then perhaps $9,000 you barely notice.
Chump change.
Millions. It's also interesting to note that everybody in Parliament earns more than $200,000 a year. So
that
they're
is interesting,
all getting the maximum rate. I'm not saying that might have been part of the reason why the threshold was set there, but they will all get the maximum rate of this tax cut.
I can understand why we think maybe in an election year the government might make some different decisions, because that's a hell of a thing to drop on the electorate after an election, I guess.
Yeah,
absolutely. That would be the ideal time to do it, wouldn't it? After
yep.
you're in, oops, everyone under $90,000, you're worse off.
Yep.
Sorry about that.
Exactly right. So I have a feeling that the government might extend the Lamito just because it's a difficult thing to go to an election if you're the coalition saying we're the party of lower taxes, but we're going to increase taxes on almost all of you.
Yeah.
7 News can reveal the Morrison government has commissioned new modelling to assess the impacts of extending the low and middle income tax offset. The measure, which gives Australians an additional $1,080 at tax time, was due to expire in June.
But then I can't imagine them extending it or making it permanent. They'll probably just extend it for another year, and then they'll dump it, and then again, 3/4 of taxpayers will be worse off.
But they've already voted for the coalition
Yep.
in this scenario, and
exactly
so it'll be
right.
too late to take it back. Well, I look forward to the budget, as always, Matt. And
I can't
to see
wait.
The
Economist
outcomes.
Christmas.
Exactly. And thank you so much for the discussion today.
Thanks for having me.
This episode was recorded on Tuesday, the 22nd of February 2022, and things may have changed since recording. You can visit australiainstitute.org.au for all our latest research and content, including the 2 income tax cuts reports written by Matt. And we're on Twitter at the Oz Institute with an AUS. My Twitter handle is Ebony_Bennett with a ~N_T, and Matt Grudnoff is at Matt Grudnoff. That's GRUDNOFF. This episode was produced by Jennifer Macy, and you can find her at Jennifer Macy, and our theme music is by Jonathan McFeet from Pulse and Thrum, with additional music from Blue Dot Sessions. Don't forget to leave us a review if you enjoy the podcast, as it helps other people to find us. Stay safe out there, and thanks for listening.